All right, Module 7, our last video, takeaways for future practice. Glad I have a little bit more time. Perhaps I can talk more slowly for this video, but I am gonna, for this first prompt, move through more quickly my 2 theories, concept, principles, and mechanisms that stood out to me in the materials from this class. So, my theories, briefly, the diathesis stress model, I think was one for me, as well as the ecological systems theory. The stress model explains that an addiction risk is not a fixed destiny, but rather an interplay where an underlying genetic vulnerability is activated by life stress and adverse environmental conditions and systemic stressors that create an addiction risk. That's interesting to me because I can see how that shows up in my clients' lives and how some of these systemic issues really factor in. And then similarly, I think with the ecological systems theory, it's much the same, understanding, this model, that states individual traits and behaviors unfold within these nested layers, of systems, family, peers, broader culture, and how much connection, shapes all of that, right? And how we understand theories and healing. Okay, moving on. I'm going too slow here. Concepts. I chose pause and the pink cloud, affect and crash. Pause is post-acute withdrawal syndrome, which is a temporary predictable pattern of lingering neurological symptoms that come in the early days after abstinence. And so, this could be anxiety, low energy, or poor focus. And the pink cloud effect, I think in a similar lane, is a nonlinear, recovery cycle where there is often this early phase of, euphoric, effortless sobriety that comes naturally. And then there is, followed by an emotional dip or like a crash out. And so, here, I think anticipating that this is cyclical, right? That recovery is a cycle, it's nonlinear, and then that is just part of healing. Principles, addiction as a brain-based medical condition and recovery as holistic whole person transformation. 2 really big ones for me that I'm going to hit in other places. So, I will just say, understanding addiction as a medical condition. I think I had this perspective before, but this class really helped solidify this more for me. So, which is a principle that addiction is chronic, relapsing disease that alters neural circuits involved in self-regulation and reward. It's not the small failing. We often, have heard in, mainstream culture and treatment. So, and then, recovery is a holistic whole person. Central, I think, to a lot of how I do my work and think about counseling. This principle, that true recovery begins beyond simple abstinence and requires reclaiming identity, restoring emotional balance, and reconnecting with purpose. Yes, really important. Mechanisms. Chronic stress threat response activation, was really kind of the biggest one I was looking at. And also, I think, there were a few others, maybe for me, things around the social model of substance use counseling, I think were pretty huge for me. So, looking at this first one here, what chronic stress threat, response activation is. It's, where chronic stress floods the body with cortisol and narrowing psychological focus and trapping the nervous system in fight or flight. So this shows up regularly with my clients. It is a major point of treatment and need and support. So, and then, thinking about the social model, and understanding that healing is connection and that we are wired for connection and wired for belonging is something I think I come back to a lot. And also, I know, I think just that principle is something that I've come to around the idea around complex trauma, and it's really shaping my work with clients and internships. So, You know, there's the first prompt, second prompt here, you know, how, you know, some of these, you know, theories and concepts, principles and mechanisms, you know, I've chosen influence my work. So I've started talking about that already because I couldn't not. But, you know, real world application, you know, there's, you know, real specific things here in working with clients with substance use, you know, starting with the diathesis stress model. You know, I think one of the most important things here, you know, to be clear about how, you know, there's genetic vulnerabilities that are activated by life stress and environment adversity, you know, is really, I think, in being able to teach clients that the role of genetics turn a stereo on or off, while the environment serves as the volume knob as to how severe symptoms present. And, you know, to help directly alleviate personal blame or self-blame and really understand, you know, what is happening, you know, client population, and, you know, that I'm working with, and explain how some of these elements, you know, are relevant. So, you know, for me, that is, you know, trauma-based populations right now, clients with major interpersonal family system trauma histories with addiction, abuse, chronic stress, who are living, you know, in survival mode, chronic fight or flight a lot. And, you know, these are the clients that, you know, I'm working with in family shelter system now. And, you know, one of the main things I think, you know, that felt especially relevant for me is around recovery as a holistic whole person transformation, you know. So, you know, knowing, you know, like what I shared already, you know, recovery is beyond simple abstinence, you know, restoring emotional balance, reclaiming identity, you know, reconnecting with purpose. This work really interests me. And I find, you know, I personally, I think I identify with a lot of these, you know, elements myself, like in work that I've done. And so, you know, I find myself drawn to doing this sort of work with clients and believing that true healing comes through addressing the, you know, whole person, and not just parts. So, you know, collaborating with clients on individualized value-driven goals, to help them build a connected, more re-socialized life centers on self-compassion, post-traumatic growth, building nervous system regulation, which is huge right now, and work I'm doing with clients just to help them manage week to week living in a shelter environment, reducing shame, fear, building safe, secure connection, understanding that we are biologically wired for belonging and connection, you know, through the social model of SUDS counseling. And then this last prompt, you know, reflection on my growth through this course, and, you know, how's my perspective changed, and, you know, what am I thinking about around beliefs, values, and goals as a future counselor? You know, how will this help me show up for clients in new ways with greater insight, you know, and purpose and humility? And, you know, I think a few core themes for me: understanding addiction as a brain-based medical condition. You know, I think my view of substance use has expanded in some new or deeper ways, for sure, in this class. You know, to a medical process involving the brain as chronic relapsing brain disease that alters neural circuits, right, involved in reward and self-regulation, rather than hormonal failure or lack of willpower. So, you know, this, I feel like, is so important to shifting how we think about addiction. Like, when I truly think about it as a medical condition or a health condition, much like, you know, we talked about, like with asthma or diabetes, really gives me more of that holistic, whole person-centered care that's needed, right? And so I will actively share this neurobiological psychoed with clients to help heal any internalized shame, helping them see that while they generally want to stop, you know, addiction or being in active addiction, their brain circuits require time and structured support to heal. I think learning more about the therapeutic alliance, you know, believing that the relationship between counselor and client is the main driver of change is huge. You know, I think, you know, I've been thinking a lot more about the role of empathetic witness now too since this class, and how important this is with clients, which I'm already beginning to see how much so in my intern client experiences, that this is critical to them wanting to come back and, you know, really being able to focus on their healing and growth. And, you know, I appreciate the ways like that this class has helped me reaffirm my commitment to client advocacy and person-centered care that I've used in my nonprofit work over the years. And now in focusing, you know, my counseling clients' unique lived experiences, you know, in new ways. And so, you know, this has given me, I think, deeper roots to my purpose, you know, to act not just as a therapist, but as an advocate, you know, using what privilege I have to increase equity and support, you know, whole person healing for my clients and just in the sector as a whole. You know, in my future counseling practice and current internship counseling, you know, at the family shelter, these shifts and growth areas will help me show up with more insight by recognizing the systemic harms and daily stressors my clients face, you know, and, you know, so I can better understand their vulnerabilities and best show up for my clients and provide transformative care. Thank you.